welcome to Anime Audio Commentary. Today I'll be commenting on episode 1 of Gunbuster. If you'd like to watch along, then start watching now. So Gunbuster, where do you begin with it, really? For my money, I'd say it's pretty darn iconic, if not an exemplar of the mecha anime genre. You know, it's basically got everything you'd want or need. Giant robots, aliens, cute girls. So here we're sort of setting up the plot a bit. You know, Noriko's talking about her father and how she wants to be like him, and he's a space pilot. But unfortunately, it would seem as though being a space pilot is a rather dangerous vocation. Interestingly enough, the date mentioned is a couple years in the past by now. It's weird how that happens, you know. The passage of time makes speculative science fiction outdated just by virtue of the dates mentioned passing. So I think it's pretty notable that despite everything that had happened, Noriko still wants to be a pilot like her father. So I think it might be best to talk a little bit about the background of Gunbuster. You know, it was kind of made during a time when making broadcast anime wasn't really profitable. So it was an OVA, which is basically analogous to direct-to-video. And I guess between a mix of economic and cultural reasons, in Japan, direct-to-video is normally a mark of higher quality. And I've got to say, I just love how Gunbuster looks. The traditional animation, the cell animation and everything. I also like how, I guess, simple the plot starts. You know, it basically just starts as high school drama and stuff like that. You know, at this school, presumably everybody is training to be a pilot. And, you know, this otherwise fantastical thing is treated as fairly mundane. So much so that the giant robots are a part of a class that everybody regularly has. So naturally, given Gunbuster's age and the period of time in which it came out, it goes without saying that there's going to be a fair bit of fan service, because, you know, they have to sell it somehow if it's not going to be broadcast. So, with the fan service, we also get a little dose of exposition. You know, Noriko sort of mentions that she's not very good with the machines despite being somewhat athletic, and her classmates are sort of picking on her too. And so it seems to be there's accusations of nepotism here, given that Noriko's father was an admiral. So I like the juxtaposition here of like the normal, I guess, anime style behavior, but with giant robots instead, you know? It lends an air of, I don't know, comedy, but it's also kind of like weird. Makes you do a double take. So this girl here, talking to Noriko, she's basically like the ace pilot of the class, and I don't know, I think it's interesting that she's simultaneously the most talented and also a kind and compassionate person, having stuck up for Noriko and taking time to talk with her and even offering advice. Of course, she's not above scolding Noriko either. You know, she insists that talent isn't what makes you a good pilot. It takes a lot of work to do. So, you know, if you're in the robot and you fall down, you have to get back up and keep going again. Just falling down and staying down won't serve anything. This seems to be another somewhat common trope of girls giving other girls things to keep their hair out of their eyes. You know, I've seen that a couple times lately, not necessarily modern usages, but the past, week or so, I've seen a couple instances of it. So it would seem that despite Noriko having a nice encounter with the ace pilot, it has engendered some resentment from another classmate of hers. You know, it's probably no stretch to say that surly-looking girl was one of the ones hassling her earlier. So now we introduce a little bit of a plot thread here. There's supposedly something really, really important going on that requires two pilots. Obviously, the top of the class is a shoo-in, but the second pilot is still up for debate. So it seems like all the girls have a new coach here, and this guy's serious business. You know, he makes it very clear he has no issue flunking them, and that starting right now, you're going to be turning off the auto balancers in the robots, meaning if you want to balance, it's going to be all manual, which I would imagine takes a lot of work. You know, the human form, which is to say bipedal, is, I would think, much less inherently stable than a quadrupedal form. But at the same time, giant robots that look like humans are much cooler. So it goes without saying that while the other students are having trouble but slowly adapting, Noriko's having a lot more trouble. You gotta feel kinda bad for her. Especially seeing as how Coach saw fit to halt her machine and orders her to get out and do the laps on foot rather than in the robot like everyone else. So it seems like Noriko's had a pretty rough go of things, having to run the 50 laps, She just sort of passed out. Can't say I blame her. I'd imagine the track was designed with a giant robot in mind and is therefore proportionally larger. So, horror of horrors, the second representative has been selected, and it turns out to be Noriko. Considering how that she is far and away the least skilled of all the pilots, it's natural for everyone to assume that it's gotta be a bout of nepotism. So all the usual rumors start flying about her and the coach and all that. Obviously there's nothing true to it, but, that doesn't stop everyone from speculating. So somewhat interestingly, both Noriko and the ace pilot are expressing their disbelief. Although the latter is talking to Coach directly, which is fairly brazen if you ask me. Interestingly enough, Coach reveals that he was a survivor of the incident that killed Noriko's father. So, it seems like his motives are entirely his own. He's not necessarily being nepotistic. He seems to see something in her that no one else does. So obviously Noriko wasn't meant to overhear this, but she does nonetheless. So, as could be expected, everybody begins treating Noriko rather harshly. Graffitiing the announcement, picking on her. It's really rotten, but kind of the stereotypical behavior you'd expect. They even graffiti the robot she uses, and while the remarks aren't translated, I'd imagine they're pretty mean-spirited. Now this scene is what really does it for me. They put tacks on the seat of her robot. That's just rotten behavior. So I think this scene here is interesting because this is sort of the first indication that Coach isn't totally physically able. He walks with a cane. Noriko goes to him and sort of talks about how she feels that he's picking on her by putting her through all of this. And he sort of takes it as an admission from her that, you really think you're that worthless and that Kazumi isn't? Well, come on and watch this. As it turns out, what Kazumi said before is true. It takes hard work. And it's the inclination towards working hard that Noriko is currently lacking. So Coach is really trying to drive the point home that, yeah, talent is important, but talent is nothing if you don't also work. And Coach is furthermore convinced that she has the natural talent somewhere, but it can't truly be honed unless she puts in the work. So it would seem that speech is exactly what Noriko needed to hear. And just like Kazumi, she resolves herself to work hard. I also gotta say, I really love the entire soundtrack. It's just so good. This track isn't a particular standout, but even so, I think it really fits the mood of the training montage. So Noriko works from honing her physical body towards working in the robot. And interestingly, she does a lot of the same exercises in the robot as she did outside. I think it's interesting because you're not improving the mechanics of the robot by doing this. But in a sense, I suppose I can understand that you'd be improving your ability to use the robot. So just like that, Noriko immediately begins improving, much to the chagrin of everyone else. They seem to think that Coach's favoritism is the defining factor here. So one student even goes up to Coach and asks him what exactly is going on here. He doesn't even deign to answer her. Coach is just too cool for school. He can't keep getting away with it. So naturally, Coach telling her off wasn't enough to stop her. She has seen fit to, invite Noriko to a fight after school. So that Noriko actually showed up seems a bit out of character in that this other girl assumed she would just, bow her head and give up. But Noriko seems to have become confident enough to have shown up. It doesn't seem to be doing her much good right now. So So, considering that Noriko's sort of housed inside the torso of the robot, I'd imagine this isn't, like, too rough on her. But at the same time, she seems to be cracking under the pressure. You know, she wasn't quite prepared for a fight like this. So interestingly, as others plead for the coach to intervene, you know, he's of the mindset that real combat will be even worse than this, and that intervening would be a disservice to Noriko. So fortunately for Noriko, it seems that a lot of the training has sort of sunk in, and she's realized that one of her big issues is that she relies too much on the monitors and it distracts her. So, it kind of reminds me of the original Star Wars in a way, you know, turning off the targeting computer to bomb the Death Star. Noriko turns off her monitors in order to fight, meaning she's effectively fighting blind. But to similar effect, you know, it's working out for her much better than before. Once she gets going, you know, it really doesn't take her very much to knock the other robot right out. And spectacularly, too. You know, she left a big imprint of her foot on the torso of the robot. So just to really nail things down, you know, Noriko's been training for barely more than a month, and she's already progressed this far. So this really sort of vindicates Coach's idea that she's a natural talent that just needs to be honed. So that's it then, you know, Coach's choice is final and also correct. So the three of them are going to head into space for the next sort of portion of their education. You know, truly becoming defenders of humanity against those vicious aliens. I find it interesting that they seem to be just taking, you know, an airliner into space, not like a specialized spaceship. You know, granted, this is taking place in the future, at least from the perspective when it was made, so I guess they thought we'd have commercial space flights by now. Unfortunately, that's not quite the case. Alright, so last but not least, we have a little bit at the end just to nail down some world building. And so it's sort of operating under the guise that Noriko is a bit behind on her schoolwork, so they need to talk about outer space and all the neat and interesting physics behind that. So I don't know quite how much the physics they're discussing is actually true, but, as I understand it, space is approximately a vacuum around 3 degrees Kelvin, so, that somewhat checks out. So, they start by creating a fictional physicist, Dr. Tannhauser, at the end of the 20th century. And I like how they describe Newton's physics as ancient physics, Einstein's physics as classical physics, and Tannhauser as modern physics. Because, as we understand it currently, Newtonian physics is classical physics and Einsteinian physics is modern physics. I like little bits of world building like that sort of play on our existing understanding and twist it a little bit. So now they're talking about essentially faster than light travel and how that's formed by using black holes and things like that. Again, I think they're sort of using actual physics and playing around a little bit with its application. So interestingly enough, they're talking about redshifts and stuff like that. Those are actual physics terms, but I don't think they're being applied quite correctly here. I mean, this isn't exactly the hardest sci-fi, so I'm not complaining, but I think it's interesting. Alright, well that's it for this episode. If you've enjoyed it, then by all means, tune in for the next one. See you, Space Cowboy.